Hey there, it's Jason from Codemanship with a second lockdown haircut. This is now a 2 crew cut pandemic. We'll see how many more I give myself before a vaccine arrives. This morning for the video diary, I just wanted to have a little rant about training developers. Now, this is something that I do for a living, so I know a little bit about it. I've had a fair amount of experience working with a wide range of clients, many of whom I'm very lucky I'm very thankful to say that they do invest more than most in the training of their developers. Otherwise, I'd be out of a job. But the pattern across the industry is much worse than that. Many developers, when they come into the industry as apprentices or trainees, for example, get very little training, just a few weeks sometimes, and essentially they're taught to write code and some other basics, and then they're thrown at the deep end, and then to all intents and purposes, the training stops. And that's compounded by the fact that most organizations don't have any kind of structured system of mentoring. So it's very ad hoc if developers get much at all. And those senior developers who probably should be doing the mentoring are often seen as their time is too valuable to have them wasting it mentoring junior developers. So for many developers, their experience of entering the industry literally is, a bit of training and then they sink or swim, basically. The ones who do, on the whole, there are exceptions, but the ones who do kind of put in the time to learn are having to put in their own time, basically, because their employers are not willing to invest. It's laudable, but it shouldn't be necessary. And it occurs to me that it's a barrier to diversity, because people with outside commitments, for example, single parents or people who are caring for relatives or volunteers, might not have the time to do that. So you're giving them a choice, which is, look, you either stay at this very basic level or you're going to have to reprioritize your life. And we don't ask that of many professions, certainly not ordinary professions like software development. Talking of professions or trades, another trade I've had not first-hand experience, but second-hand experience of working on building sites for my dad's company as a teenager is bricklaying. So I've worked as a labourer for many bricklayers in my youth. And bricklaying, it seems to me, is undoubtedly a skilled job. And an apprenticeship for a bricklayer lasts a couple of years, usually. And much of those 2 years is spent in college or in school, learning, basically, dedicated learning time. And it's very striking to me, because we believe that bricklayers, or rather the construction industry believes that it takes at least 2 years to become a bricklayer. And it takes, a significant amount of time and investment in training as well as on-the-job learning. Plus, newly minted bricklayers, people who are doing apprenticeships in bricklaying, are not working unsupervised. That would be very dangerous and very unwise. So there's usually systems of supervision and mentoring in place on the job as well, and it's all very structured. Now, I appreciate that the construction is a much older industry than software development, but we are still, we've been kicking around now for 70 years, and we've learned a thing or two. And one of the things I've learned is that it takes at least 2 years for someone to become a software developer that you could leave to work unsupervised most of the time. At least 2 years. It's at least as complicated, at least as skilled as bricklaying. Can we all agree on that? That software development is at least as skilled as bricklaying. In which case, these, as great and as useful as they are as a sort of a Kickstarter, 6-week, 12-week boot camps and so on and so forth, doesn't even touch the sides. At the end of that, they're still a trainee. They're not even a junior developer, really. You can't leave them working unsupervised because they'll make a mess. But most organizations do. So that's my rant, really. Why is it that the construction industry believes it takes at least 2 years to grow a bricklayer, but we think you can learn to be a software developer in 6 weeks or 12 weeks? It's utter nonsense, really, when you think about it. So how do we square this circle? Well, I've been trying for 20 years now, and what I've learned is employers are not willing, they're not going to willingly make the investment most of the time. There are some exceptions. There are some companies that do very good apprenticeships. Many of the companies that have brought people in through the government software development apprenticeship scheme are, again, they were under the impression that these would just be cheap developers. They weren't really interested in offering them that much training or mentoring. So I've spoken to a lot of them who brought them in thinking, oh, great, cheap developers, and then found out, no, you have to actually invest a lot of money to turn them into developers, and then they turn in, and by the time you've turned them into developers, they're not cheap anymore. So employers really have stopped looking to them for the most part. I'm very lucky to work with some of the ones that do get it, but the majority don't. The education sector, schools and universities, with some notable exceptions, as far as software development is concerned, a bit of a dead end. A lot of lecturers, a lot of academics don't really see. Basically, they think we're doing it wrong. So their advice is impractical and often very out of date, and that has unfortunately fed into the design of the UK software developer apprenticeship as well. It's out of date, and in many cases a little impractical. So education, generally speaking, is not the place to look for this either. Even if they wanted to teach this stuff, the problem is, like as it is with bricklaying, you can't have people who are bricklaying theorists teaching bricklaying. You need people who've been bricklayers. And it's the same with software development. Much of what we do, there is theory obviously, but much of what we do is practical. And you need people who've done it and done quite a lot of it. And those people, unfortunately, can earn a lot more money doing it than they can teaching it. And so universities are generally kind of starved of people with practical industry experience or recent industry experience. The government, well, the less said about them at the moment, the better. Let's just say, forget government. And finally, there's us, the industry itself. But when I say the industry, I don't mean the employers. I'm very clear about this, because the employers are the ones who got their hands dirty designing the UK software developer apprenticeship, for example, and that's one of the reasons why it's out of date, and it's not. It's very obvious that it wasn't designed by software developers. It was designed by academics and employers of software developers. And therefore, I mean, software developers no doubt got involved, but I had a few meetings with them and realised actually they didn't really care what I thought, and their minds were made up on how they were going to teach this stuff. So when I say the industry, I mean us, actual software developers, the software developer community. I still see this as our best hope for real long-term investments in training software developers, in apprenticeships, for example. I still don't know how that's going to work. I've had some very isolated successes just mentoring people one-to-one, not in a very structured way. And it does occur to me now that it needs structure, it needs a roadmap, and it needs a kind of a community behind it and an organization behind it for it to scale and for it to really work. How it will work? Well, I've looked at various options here, and I think ultimately, and I know this is a bit of a hot topic with a lot of software developers, I think maybe we need some kind of professional body, some kind of, let's call it a union even maybe, but maybe an institute of software development or something like that, something with members and a bit of kudos and a bit of a budget to manage this thing, to organise this thing, to promote this thing in its various forms, and more importantly, to lean on the employers to say, look, you need to invest in this, so that we got to get the big message we have to get across to employers and software developers is, it ain't that easy, mate. It really ain't that easy. Expect to invest at least a couple of years to get them to the point where they can work unsupervised. Expect that of those 2 years, a significant portion of that time, maybe 2 or 3 days a week to begin with, is going to be spent just learning. And then maybe, or 50-50 or whatever it's going to be. And gradually that will go down, but also expect that for the length of that developer's career, it's still going to be in the region of maybe 20% of their time just spent learning and experimenting and reflecting on how they do what they do. So it never stops. But my message to employers has always been, stop thinking of that 20%. What do you get for that? Start thinking of what you're getting for the other 80% of your investment in that developer. If they can learn to work better, work smarter, then you'll get a lot more from that 80% that you're spending on project work or product work than the 100% you were spending without any learning going on. So there you go. There's my rant for this morning. It just occurred to me as I was just reading a newspaper article about bricklaying apprenticeships. Like, why do people think it takes 2 years to train as a bricklayer, but you can do the software development in 12 weeks? It's a nonsense, of course. It's absolute nonsense. Anyway, there you go. Ring the bell for notifications, subscribe, blah, blah, blah. And hope you're well. I hope you're enjoying your lockdown haircut if you've got one. And I will see you in the next video.